Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, we are continuing the Armageddon crossover event, part 4. Obviously, we get a little bit of a different perspective on the ending of the last episode, where it's like, right, we're 10 years in the future. We find out about Ryan and Sophie, apparently, like, they're married and everything. You're like, yo! And potentially Ryan's thinking about having a baby, and Iris is like, oh, just kind of don't think about it too much, just kind of follow your heart. Allegra and Chester, there's kind of a weird thing going on there. Apparently, like, while everything was going down, you have Frost and Mark leaving the room. So I'm like, oh, so this is officially a thing now, and I guess he's just part of the squad now. So that's interesting to know that I guess he pops back in at some point in time. Maybe, potentially. And it's just like, oh, what happened while we were gone? Because it's like, yeah, like, Allegra did say, like, the bathroom was, like, super occupied. Now we know why. Poor Cecile having to deal with Jenna, who's now a teenager, and it's like, right, hearing every terrible thought your teenage child has ever had about you, so that's definitely interesting. But while that's all going on, Barry shows up, and he's trying to tell her, it's like, no, I'm Barry. They're like, don't mention my father, Joe, you murderer. He's like, what? Guys, I'm the Flash, and he puts on a suit, and he's wearing the reverse Flash suit, and then Eobard puts on the Flash suit. It's like, no, I'm the Flash. Reverse Flash. And you're like, dude, this is sick. He's like, everyone suit up. And you're like, dude, this is some twisted stuff. Which I'll go ahead and talk about it. But like, Barry's like, you created a Flashpoint. He's like, no, reverse Flashpoint. Because I brought that up last episode. Once again, I don't know if this is applicable to the comic, but I'm just basing this on the Justice League Flashpoint Paradox, the animated movie adaptation of it. But I brought it up that Barry believed that Eobard was responsible for Flashpoint and then realized, like, oh, I'm the one that did this. But it's like, no, in this case, it's like, no, it was Eobard all along. God, that is just, like, how gleeful he is and how savage he is about him. Like, man, you were just so happy about it. But, like, yeah, the problem is he's working up against the entire team. Plus, Barry doesn't have all of his speed. Like, it's all been drained from him, so he's like, I think later on they're talking about, like, I think Eobard's like, oh, you're at what, 5%, if even that, because Jefferson did, like, most of the work last episode. But, yeah, having to go up against the entire squad. Ryan, she's suited up. The other Ryan using some of the tech, so he's on his Atom status already to some extent, because he even talks about it later on that Chester needs to work on his suit. Allegra powering up. Alex help. It's like, dude. Which, speaking of Alex, it is super cute when she's able to just casually drop the W word. My wife, and you're like, yeah. I love it. I think it's so fascinating, and I think it fits so interestingly with, like, the fact is that this is just, like, any episode of The Flash, because, yeah, even though there's all the serious stuff going on, there's also, like, just the personal inner team stuff that's going on at the same time, right? So it's interesting that even though Barry's doing all this other stuff, that's already still happening, So I think that's such an interesting thing, and that speaks volumes about, like, the world that they live in and what they think to be true. Because Barry tried to leave with Iris and says, like, oh, you're my lightning rod. She's like, no, I'm not, you psychopath. Because I'm like, I love it because, like, truthfully, from their perspective, it's like, where the hell do you, like, the bad guy, your Eobard's arch nemesis, it's just out of nowhere being like, wait, you guys, we're on the same side. Like, Eobard went back in time and changed everything. They're like, what are you talking about, crazy? But then Eobard was like, yo, here's my sinister plan, what I did. He's like, you know what? Last time we fought each other in season 7's finale, I recognized that, yes, you were faster than me. So I knew I couldn't just straight up beat you. So what I decided to do is I'm going to beat you in a straight up fight. I was going to take everything from you. All the stuff that happened down present day when you attacked the city. Oh, that was me wearing your face. I killed your dad, the only father figure you had left, Joe. Went back and changed everything. I made sure I was the one that was struck by lightning. I made sure that Iris fell in love with me. And, like, do you know how sick that is? I'm like, I'm going to go back in time and make the woman who fell in love with you and you fell in love with, I'm going to make her love me. And I made you the bad guy because it's like, because it's so fascinating. Because once again, they've never really gone into the ins and outs. I've talked about time and time again of why Eobard hates Barry as much as he does. Like, whether it's like an inferiority complex, whether it's just because like, oh, Eobard saw his future of like, oh, I'm going to grow up to be the Flash's nemesis. Well, if I'm going to be the bad guy, I'm going to be the best bad guy there is. So it's like fate and destiny put me towards being the villain. So now I get to be the hero. I get to have everything. Not only does he get to have the life that, you know, it's like he gets the friends, he gets the love, he gets the happy life, and he gets to also take it away from Barry. So it's a two birds, one stone type of situation. But he's also like, oh yeah, I also went back in time and killed you as a kid. I accomplished what I wanted. Oh, I finally got what I wanted. And in that process, you have until the stroke of midnight until this timeline solidifies, and you potentially almost Marty McFly yourself out of existence. And you're like, wow. So that's fascinating. It's like, oh man, like, he finally did it. He, quote unquote, won. And so Barry's like keeping low key, but we find out a lot of the terrible things. Because during the fight, they were like, oh, this is for Nate, this is for Ray, this is for Sarah. You're like, yo. It sounds like later on when they talk about, just it seems like straight up all of the legends are dead. But it turns out, Barry and Damien Dark work together in this universe. Which once they said Damien Dark, I was like, wait, are they wait? Are we? Because I didn't see I wasn't looking fully at the opening credits. So I was like, is it? And lo and behold, it's your boy Neil McDonough. I was like, yeah. Even I was like, it's interesting. Like, we do have a pseudo Legion of Doom reunion. I mean, granted, it's 2 out of the 3, but still. I think that's so fascinating. Which, speaking of the opening credits, I do love that they shift out Grant Gustin for Tom Cavanaugh in those opening sequences with Barry. I'm like, oh, dude, that's twisted, and I love it. But yeah, Damien Dark, they also killed, God, there was someone, oh yeah, I think, the Legends, but they also killed Cisco, who was on because that's who, Allegra was fighting for. She's like, and this one's for Cisco. Which is like, man, knowing that, like, your best friend is dead in this universe, too, so... Which is like, man, Eobard sucks. He had to have done that because, like, he tried to kill, Cisco before, but then, like, you know, Barry rewound time when he ended up killing Cisco back in season 1, so, like... You know, that had to be that extra oomph, because I guess you couldn't take the chance that Cisco would get in your way again, because he is vibe. Well, that also makes sense, because of his vibe abilities, he would have been able to see through, like, what you changed, you know, so he would have been able to see through everything, so that's why you definitely had to remove him from the board. You also had to get rid of the Legends, because you can't have them time traveling, changing things, especially because they are time traveling, like, well, because they are in their circumstances, like, their memories would have changed too, but they wouldn't have been in the timeline to be effective. You know, so that's why I'm like, that's probably extra reason still. Like, you don't want any other time travelers screwing things up, especially when you've won. But Barry shows up talking to Damien like, oh, like, it starts talking all villain-like and stuff like that. And I love that he's like, I sometimes forget you're darker than me. Pun intended. I'm like, yeah. Oh, I love it. Because I did think it was interesting, because I think they said specifically that Damien's the one that killed a lot of the Legends, including Ray, which I'm like, oh, that's ironic that you would kill Ray, because you and Ray ended up, interestingly enough, becoming besties. Also, he's your son-in-law, so it's like, oh. I wonder, Barry probably doesn't know the full story, does he? I mean, because, well, obviously we know because of season 5, he came back, but then, like, destroyed himself, so, like, there's no, like, even, he didn't even, like, go back to hell. He just, like, straight up, like, killed and destroyed himself. So, the whole, the Encore situation, right? But, yeah, him and Damien have to work together. I'm like, this is so weird, and I'm loving it. It's like, oh, yeah, we have to get the PED. He's like, the PED? And he's like, what, the thing you literally ripped out of, like, Ray Palmer's cold dead hands. He's like, sorry, we've killed as many people as I have. You lose track. And I love it. Damon's like, all right, let's get to work. Like I said, we learned a lot of the interpersonal relationships. Like I said, the whole Allegra and Chester thing. Like, Alex kind of gets in the middle of that, and she's like trying to figure out like what's going on because of the weird awkwardness between the two of them. Well, it turns out they hooked up and it could have potentially been something more, but Allegra was like, yeah, Chester just like left and just kind of ghosted me. But we get Chester's perspective. Alex gets Chester's perspective and it's like, no, Allegra kind of shifted the narrative. He's like, I went to go get stuff like coffee and muffins, and by the time I came back, she was gone. And I tried to talk to her about what was happening, kind of cleared up misunderstanding, but she cut me off and said, like, us hooking up was a mistake. And you're like, oh, that's heartbreaking. But then you have, like, Ryan being like, no, it's okay. Saying, like, you know, it's kind of for the best because he's, like, anti-love and stuff like that. But then, like, Alex is like, what's your deal? Like, what's your problem? And he's like, the fact is, I love that she made the statement of, like, essentially having someone in your life, like, you know, someone you can wake up next, because you don't want to wake up, like, spend the rest of your life not having anyone to wake up next to, waking up alone. You know, it's like the best part of, like, humanity, which I'm like, oh, it's funny considering he's a literal paragon of humanity. But he was even saying, like, oh yeah, you could say that with your perfect wife and your perfect life. She's like, well, okay, yes, but, you know, like, love isn't a bad thing, but he kept trying to pretend like it was. It's like, yo, I've done everything I can to help my boy Chester out, which I guess, like, Ryan kind of feels a little bit of that, like, Cisco, like, void a little bit in certain regards, which I think is fascinating. But a little before all that, like, Damien and Barry show up and they do their damage. And I love that they ended up getting a PED because Barry knew exactly where it was, because he knows Chester so well. He was like, oh, it's obviously in, like, the pinball machine or whatever, and ended up getting it. And before Damien could kill them, like, he jetted him out of there. We also love that we got Cecile, because it looks like she got the gold mask back, but it seems like there's alterations on the side to make it more, I guess, controllable, so it won't, like, so I guess it, like, helps enhance her powers without her losing herself like before. So I thought that was so interesting. I was like, oh, that's so fascinating. Like, yeah, so once again, like, how much of this stuff will potentially continue in the traditional continuity? Like, is some of this going to stick out? I don't know. It's definitely going to be fascinating to find out. Also, because, like, Iris is kind of questioning the whole thing, because it's like, oh yeah, Barry said that, Alan said that I was his, and it's so interesting because they refer to him as Alan and not Barry, because it's like, yeah, because more often than not, when they refer to Eobard, they always say Thawne, they never say Eobard, so it makes sense. I think that's such a neat little detail of, like, yeah, calling him Alan, because they always refer to Reverse Flash as Thawne, and, like, Barry's, like, the only one, I don't even know if Barry never even calls him Eobard. Well, he calls him Eobard here and there, but he always mainly refers to him as Thawne, so does everyone else. So I think that's just a neat little dialogue detail. But, like, Iris is kind of taken aback for a second, because she's like, yeah, calling me his likeness. He's like, yeah, you're not his, like, you're my likeness. She's like, I know, I love you. He's like, I love you too. And he hugs her. I'm like, that's sickening. Once again, you're taking someone else's life, their wife and everything. Oh, you're sick. And even hugging her too, because it's like, the thing is, you don't love her. Because the thing is, you manipulated her. You knew all the things to do and say to make her love you. Because, like, oh, you know Barry's life in and out. You just knew what to say and do. You manipulated her into falling in love with you so that you could build this life for yourself. Which is really disgusting and psychopathic on so many levels. It just shows you how. Because even when Damien found out about, like, what Eobard did, he was like, oh my god, guy's a true. That's a work of beautiful evil art. He's like, man, that guy's good. Eobard's so good, changing everything like this. But he's like, so what do I do with you? But Barry's like, no, you don't want to do anything to me. Like, the fact is, we need to turn back the original timeline. And he's like, no, but it's like, your daughter, Nora, she's alive. And he's like, what? It's like, yeah, she's alive in my time. It's like, so using the time stone, he ends up seeing Barry's memories. It's like, right, you sacrificed yourself for Nora in season 3, and she got to live her whole life. It's like, oh, now, because that's also the psychopathic thing. Eobard knows his ripple effects killed Damien Dark's daughter, that she's not supposed to be dead, but he didn't care. He still worked with the dude, you know. And I think that's so like, that's once again just psychopathic. Like, how do you work with someone knowingly, and you've been keeping it from him? Like, yeah, I changed time, and your daughter isn't supposed to be dead, but she is dead. There was even this line between, because Iris is trying to write her her vows, but she can't. She's on the first line, and just like anytime she's like, I know I love Eobard, but when I think about it, it's just like it's like a blank page like this, and it's like, yeah, because even on some level, there's some part of her brain knowing like something's not right. Her and Barry's love runs so deep, even in Altered Timeline, him saying what he said just changed something in her, because it's like it sparked something, because it didn't feel like none of this felt right in certain regards. To be fair, she's always been able to want to kind of see certain things because her and Barry's like connection runs so deep. I mean, to be fair too, she has her own connection to the Speed Force. That was also a point that Eobard was making. It's like, oh, the Speed Force isn't going to help you because she chose me in this timeline, you know? So makes you wonder, do the other forces exist in this continuity as well? They didn't really go into that, but because like how much changed, how much was different. We see some of the things that are different, like, but how much other stuff is the same. But Ryan was talking to her about what you convinced me of, because I think it's interesting that Ryan's like, oh, she had a full circle moment of how Kate saved her Halloween, and like, you know, it's like, oh, someone living in a van, like she did the same thing for someone else, and in that moment, like seeing someone kind of struggling on the street, and like, you know, it made her that much more appreciative of Cora, her adopted mom, taking her in, adopting her, that it's like, right, me and Sophie, we're going to adopt, kind of like pay it forward and kind of do the same thing, because you know what she wants to do for some other person, the same thing that, you know, Cora did for her. I thought was really sweet. I also love her being like, yeah, that was Batwing. He hit me up to be like, yeah, Two-Face is running amok. I'm like, yo. I was like, now OG Two-Face or new Two-Face? I'd assume OG, but not unless it's a fanboy. I mean, because we are dealing with like currently with like the Batman trophies, but I would think it had to be OG Two-Face. So you're like, hey, still doing your thing, huh? But I also love that reference, like the weapon that will help stop a speedster. She's like, yeah, like, you know, classic run-in with someone in full red. They referenced a lady in full red. I was like, the only speedster I can think of in full red, I was like, trajectory? Like, is that supposed to be... Well, because you also have to think about, this is a post-Crisis World 2 timeline regardless, too. So I'm like, I don't know if that's supposed to be indicative either. I could be completely wrong, but I that's the person that came to my mind, because I know she was on like a one episode thing in the show, but she is someone from the comics as well. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if that's supposed to be indicative of that, or is that someone else. But other than that, now that Damian and Barry are on the same page of like reversing time and everything, because, you know, it's like, right, I need to make sure that Nora survives, so, you know, these unlikely foes have to work together. Which, to be fair, it's like, it's not the first time Barry's worked with a bad guy. It's not even the first time Damian Dark's worked with a good guy. So it's like, yeah, they've both been down this route before. But having done the calculations, Barry knows that he has to reach like 40,000 miles per hour to like reach Mach 20, so that he could like do what he needs to, because the anachronisms, the amount that Eobard's created, you basically have to knock them all out at once. It can't be like a one, like you'd have to do it all at once type of thing to kind of really like fix the timeline back to the way it was. But Barry's like, there's not enough runway to do that, which he was like, yeah, like the whole world. But Barry's like, me reaching those speeds will cause volcanic issues and stuff like that, because for him, he's like now realizing like the thing that Despero was warning about, I would be doing that. I'd be enacting Armageddon by reaching those speeds. But it's kind of like, yeah, to save the world, to get the original timeline back, he'd have to sacrifice this world. Which, yes, Damien Dark's like, I don't want to die, but I'm going to if it means bringing my Nora back and ensuring that she gets to live. He's like, because at the end of the day, Barry's like, the fact is, like, how am I supposed to do this? He's like, you better run really fast. And he was also like, yeah, but you do what you do. Like, you know, it's like, how can I do this? You know, he's like, love, you idiot. I saw it. You have like, you're the paragon of love. You literally helped save an entire universe after being erased because of love. But obviously, it's still that thing of like, how do I, you know, because for him, he's like, I don't have, like, Iris doesn't remember anything between us, but Damien is like, but you do. Like, both of us are in this because we are willing to do anything and everything for the people we love, you know? So let's kind of get this done. So he does visit with, Iris one more time, but Eobard shows up and it's like, no, Barry, she loves me. tell him, Iris, or better yet, show him. Because Barry is like, if this is going to be the end one way or another, I need to tell you, like, how this is, like, if this is going to be, like, the end, you know? And so Iris, like, listened to Barry's words and used the weapon against Eobard, despite everything, because there's some part of her that's like, you know, get out of here before I change my mind, because it's like, what he said reached her when she was like, I love you, you know? She doesn't know why, but somehow it sparked something in her, just like the Eobard thing couldn't. Because despite everything, he can say all and manipulate the timeline to be what he wants it to be, but that's not who he is. He's just a scheming bastard that he is. Because even to the point, like, oh, like, Cecile was like, oh, I'm sorry, and then he was like, yeah, but do better. Like, yeah, Barry can kind of snap at the demon from some time to time, but, you know, Eobard doesn't care about them. They're all a means to an end. It's just for the sake of hurting Barry. He doesn't care about these people at all. They're not his close friends. They're not his family. But at the same time, Alex talks to Allegra, and we kind of find out why she lied about the whole Chester thing, because she got scared. Because for her, it's like, it triggers some, like, trauma in her when her mom, when she was 12 years old, her mom told her, like, oh, your dad left because of you. So she's like, yeah, my mom was kind of crappy too. But for her, it's like seeing Chester come back, like, she panicked. Because for her, it's like, she's scared that every person in her life, like, is going to leave her. Which I get that. And she, you know, so she kind of wanted to cut that off at, like, because she didn't want to ruin things. Because, like, if we start dating, like, eventually I'm going to lose him, because he is someone that's important in her life. And she'd rather them just stay friends and kind of bury how she's feeling rather than, you know, deal with the consequences. But even Ryan at the end is like, yo, like, you don't want to do that. Like, you know, I put on this, like, whole, like, play, like, Don Juan persona, but it's just, you know, it's a cover for the fact that he's like, yeah, I don't want to, like, you know, spend the rest of my life alone. So it's like, right, you might want to take the chance to, you know, do what you can. So obviously, at the same time that's happening, Barry and Dark, it's like, right, thank you, Damien. And he's like, all right, get going, I'll cover for you. And I love it that Mark, because his name is like Children or something like that. I was like, oh, I didn't know he had that. I don't think they nicknamed him Present Day, had they? But it's Mark and Frost show up, and they're taking on Damien, and he tries to use power against. He's like, you know, I have magic. I can like basically draw and quarter you just with my mind. And he tries to use his power. It's like, sorry, but John protected his Constantine. Oh, I hate that guy. But they kind of duke it out because, like, yeah, even without his magic, he's still Damien Dark. He's still a proficient fighter. Because he's still tied. Wasn't that Damien Dark's whole thing was like he was tied to the League of Assassins anyway. Like he's a skilled fighter regardless. We know that even without his magic. So he's going up against them, and he does, you know, kind of hold his own until Ryan shows up in his Atom suit, which I'm like, yo, he's wearing the more traditional Atom suit because obviously, like, the color scheme's slightly there for Ray's suit, but this is the more, I think, comic accurate version of the suit. Like, I think it's because I think multiple people have taken up the mantle of the Atom, so I'm sure the suit kind of changes depending on it. But this one, it reminds me of I think, like I said, I think this is probably like the OG, like, classic costume, or at least a version of it, because it reminds me of in Injustice 2, the Atom, that's the suit the Atom wears in that, so it's like, yep, he's full-blown Atoming it up. I'm like, yeah, I love that, you know, his next appearance is like a crossover event, but it's like, yeah, like, that's pretty dope knowing that he's kind of, like I said, he was already working his way there, but once again, this isn't a timeline where Ray isn't alive anymore. But to be fair, like, Ray did get introduced in the first part of this, so it could be, like, eventually passing on that mantle. But that's all going down, and just, I love Damien just, I hate science, and Alex being like, you're definitely going to hate this part then. And he gets knocked out, but Barry's hauling ass across the world, and it's like, yeah, causing events all over the place, and Eobard is chasing after him. But I love that, like, it's like, before he left, Ryan was like, yo, if anyone's got to say anything they want to say, now might be the time, considering it's like the end of the world. And it's like, oh, we're counting down, and it's like, Chester, Chunk, he's like, what? She's like, I love you. And then Caitlin's like, Paulson's kind of got this, like, wait, what? Look. And Chester's like, and he's like, I love you too. And then they start making out, and then Caitlin's like, when did this happen? I'm like, once again, it's the flash thing of like, yeah, without all this happening, it's like, yeah, you might as well spend this time trying to be with the people you love, because we don't know if everything's about to end. And in that moment, it's just like Eobard's chasing after Barry. He's like, you can't do it, you won't make it. But in that moment, Barry's thinking about Iris as he's kind of fading away because his time is running out. But in that moment, Iris kind of like, it hits her. She's like, I love you too, Barry. And we see the surge in her eyes of like, yeah, like in that moment, they reconnect to the speed. She reconnects into the speed force, gives it enough speed to ripple through. And back in present day, your boy Despero literally killed everyone except for Cecile because she has all the information he needs. I'm like, that's dark. But luckily, that got rewound. So, Despero, I guess because he has technology that prevents him from being affected by changes in the timeline and stuff like that. Because he remembers everything, but everything shifted around him. And Barry steps to him and is like, right, what you left before things went, but the fact is things changed. Eobard Thawne did change the timeline. What caused Armageddon was him chasing after me. Both of our time, like our speed weight, the world in the wake of our speed ended up creating Armageddon. And I love that Eobard was like, oh, I'd never destroy the world I've went so hard to make. Like once you're gone, it's all going to be perfect. It's all going to work out. It's all going to be fine. But, Despero believes what Barry is saying, so he's like, right, I'm going to go to the future, and if I find out if anything is wrong, the world's still in danger, I will be back. And so Barry, like, goes and checks on the team, and it's just like everyone's there, and he's just so happy to see them. He speeds over to Iris and hugs her, and they're like, what's wrong, Barry? He's like, everything's fine. She's like, wait, did something happen? He's like, later, I want to spend time with you guys. And she's like, oh, I'm going to call up Dad and Frost. He's like, wait, can I? And she's like, yeah, go ahead. And it's ringing, and he's like, hey, Joe, and you're like, yeah, dude. But once again, how much of that future, like, well, Ryan and Sophie are kind of in the middle of things right now, but that could potentially mean, like, things are going to work out. Allegra and Chester, maybe things could be a little different. I mean, to be fair, that's also, too, Barry didn't get to spend much time with their circumstances, so it's just kind of like, oh, I was kind of in and out. So we got that side of things, and that's something we could look forward to, like, the beginnings of it, but also, like, Eobard's effects had ripples, so we don't know, like, how differently things are going to play out in this timeline versus, like, the one Eobard created. So that's definitely going to be fascinating. But aside from that, we have Eobard showing up at the end. It's like, right, like, you're not going to win. I am going to win in the end. You don't get to win. You erased the timeline I'm from. I'm back to being the reverse flesh. It's like, no. And he goes over to Gideon and it's like, you're going to help me. And then he does. I was like, I love that. Once again, like, they're the only ones that do it. Barry does it, but it's never consistent, like, because he does it a little bit with the, like, lightning in his eyes, but, like, Eobard doing the red, Zoom doing, like, the black eyes, like, I mean, I guess arguably you could make the argument technically Barry did with the Savitar situation with the blue eyes, technically speaking, but regardless, I'm excited to see where all of this takes us going into the next episode, because it is the finale for the Armageddon crossover. So how this all plays out, what Eobard's got up his sleeves, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. Because, like, everything up to this point had gotten erased. So, like, technically everything from, like, maybe part 1 to part 4, part 3 had kind of been undone. Like, oh, Barry had never done all that stuff. So Despero's here because he's here. But, like, the conversation, so, like, I don't know if the raid thing already happened or, like, how things have shifted. Maybe, like, the 7 days thing is still in effect, but Barry never went quote-unquote crazy and stuff like that. So maybe every other aspect is the same except those elements, so some of the stuff has changed. I don't know. That's going to be interesting to find out what changed with what Barry did. So it's going to be interesting to see what the finale to Armageddon has in store for us. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.